Welcome to This Week in Morgan County. I'm your host, Russell Mokhiber, and our guest this week is Jim Michael. Jim is a native of Morgan County, and he's also vice chair of the West Virginia Conservation Agency Eastern Panhandle District, and president of the Capon State Park Foundation, and president of the West Virginia State Parks Foundation. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right,
Russell.
thank you for coming in.
I'm glad to be here.
Good. Now, you were born and raised here.
I was born and raised here. My father was Gladstone Michael, grandfather Milton Michael. They resided and had the farm where Winchester Grade Road enters US 522. So
that's going to be where the new Sheets is.
Yes, and they were tomato canneries and tomato farmers. My mom was a farmer, Reba Unger, daughter of James R.S. Unger. That farm is on Luther Michael Road at the intersection of Winchester Grade Road. And my mom grew up there.
Is that where you are now?
Yes, and I own that farm now. So I was born and raised on the farms, but
were you self-sufficient? Was that farm self-sufficient back in the day?
Not at that time. I lost my father when I was a year old, Gladstone Michael.
What happened to Gladstone?
He had strep throat and passed. So in a few years, my mother married Paul D. Mars, my stepfather. He was in the Civilian Conservation Corps at Cacapon State Park, and he ended up working in fire protection for DNR. So there for 4 or 5 years, he was working and he was even moved out of Morgan County. We were out of Morgan County for a couple of years where he worked for DNR Fire Protection. In 1947, my grandfather Unger said, "I'd like you all to take over the farm." And then we really started farming. We put in a dairy farm and immediately started milking 32 cows.
Do you remember if your grandfather Unger, during that time, let's say your grandfather's time, do you remember if Morgan County was a self-sufficient county in terms of food?
Yes, we had it was a dairy here in Berkeley Springs. It was run by Gary Glasscock, and we had at least a dozen dairy farms in Morgan County. And that dairy was located out here on the road to our radio station here in Morgan County, WCST. So,
and did that milk stay in Morgan County, or was it?
It was bottled and sold right here. Yes.
And were there milkmen delivering milk around the county? Is that how that worked, or did people go pick it up?
Oh, there was delivery work. There was delivery. I don't know that went in the rural areas, and of course, we had a lot of grocery stores at that time in Berkeley Springs. I can remember at least 5 major grocery stores in the 40s, 50s, and 60s in Berkeley Springs.
Well, there were dairies, and then you mentioned tomato. I mean, it was a big area.
Yes, that was in the 30s and the 40s. A majority of the farms in the county grew at least an acre to 5 acre tomatoes. There must have been a dozen to 15 tomato cannery factories. Each of my grandparents owned their own canneries, and they would buy tomatoes from another 15, 20 farms, and they canned them, and they were all canned and sold through warehouses out of Pittsburgh, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, and so forth.
So tomato was a big industry here.
Big industry there, and then after about the 50s, it went out.
Why?
I guess it was economy, but just all of a sudden, the tomato industry just closed down.
When you were a young person, did you work on the farm?
Oh, I sure did.
What was your work on the farm?
Well, in 1947, I guess it was about 12 years old, milking cows. And also I got a chance in the summers to work in that tomato cannery. And that the Unger cannery, hired about 20 employees, 15 of them ladies that peeled tomatoes and packed them and so forth. Mm-hmm. So we operated that dairy farm and the tomatoes, and then I graduated from Berkeley Springs High School in 1953, and with my parents urging me, I went to West Virginia University College of Agriculture. 4 years, graduated with a degree in agriculture education from West Virginia University. Immediately was offered a job by U.S. Department of Agriculture's Soil Conservation Service, and I started a 35-year career working for Soil Conservation Service.
And that you weren't based here in Morgan County while you were.
No, I wasn't.
Where were you? Tell us where you went.
The first 5 or 7 years I was in Martinsburg working Berkeley County, and it was more in a training program with the soil and my job there, working out of the county office in Berkeley County. And then in 1964, I bought my first farm here in the county. But that same time, the U.S. Department of Agriculture asked me to take a job in Wellsburg, West Virginia, being the district conservationist for Brooke and Hancock counties. So I said yes. Of course, my parents were operating the dairy. They went back to beef cattle then, and they operated the land I owned while I was out of the county. But anyway, I was gone 25 years. I went from the Wellsburg job to Moundsville, West Virginia, in charge of Ohio and Ohio and Marshall counties.
Okay. Did you retire from the soil conservation?
Yes, I did.
What year?
1991.
And what have you been doing since?
Running the farm, beef cattle, hay, and grain. I've been operating the farm ever since.
Okay. And do you sell your beef locally?
Yes, I do. Okay. We sell some at the livestock sales, but we sell lots of beef to individuals. It's processed through a local slaughterhouse where the beef is butchered, properly aged, wrapped and cut and wrapped, frozen, and then it's available and people buy the beef by a quarter of beef or a half a beef or a whole beef, whatever they desire.
I was reading a book by Joe Badgett, who grew up in the southern part of the county. It's called Rainbow Pie. And he reflects on his grandparents. Joe passed away a couple years ago. And I guess he might have been your age and his grandparents were of the same age. He says the county was primarily self-sufficient back then, that people lived off their own farming. And at most a family would spend $500 to $1,000 a year. The county was primarily agricultural back then, maybe close to 100%. Do you think that was right in your grandparents' generation?
I don't know what the exact income. I would have thought it would have been more than that.
Okay.
The income. I know that those tomatoes easily sold for $1 or $2 a bushel, and they grew thousands of bushel. And the milk business was pretty big.
No, I'm talking about the amount that a family would spend on food and resources and so forth, as opposed.
Could be for food, possibly. Could be the price of food in those days.
You're involved with agriculture now. What's the situation with agriculture in Morgan County? How many farmers are farming for a living?
Oh, I don't know whether there's 25. Then there's a lot of part-time farmers.
Right.
I don't have those figures.
But how do you explain the transformation of the county from a rural county to basically a commuter county? Isn't it a commuter county primarily?
Yes, it is. Okay. Yes, it is. And,
how would you explain that transformation?
Well, agriculture economically has expanded. By that I mean what once was a economic farm unit has to be many, many times that size now. So that our small farms has been hard to increase the productivity in the units of whether it's beef, milk, or what have you, so that has reduced them. What's moving forward in our county is some of the vegetable farms. I'm going to call them vegetable fruit, and they market a lot direct marketing. But the expansion, I think, a lot in our county has been with the fruit farms, from orchards, apples, and to just all types of vegetables, and I see more movement there. And you know, the dairy industry is completely out of the county now. Not one dairy farm left in Morgan County.
When was the last one?
Oh gosh, I don't know, it was 10 years ago.
It's been 10 years.
I can't remember.
And do you have any ideas on why that happened? Why no more dairy farms here?
Well, again, it takes a sizable unit and labor, and you know, the people that were dairy farmers just retired, and
the kids didn't take it over.
The kids didn't take it over. Right.
Although you are seeing some interesting developments, like do you know about the Mock Farm?
I sure do. That's a very strong operation. Paul Mock and around 20 greenhouses now, and growing primarily lettuce, tomatoes, and some other vegetables. And again, he's marketing them, I believe, out of the area, as well as the local farmers market. And that's very important that we have a farmers market here in Berkeley Springs.
Let's talk about a little bit about the West Virginia Conservation Agency. You're vice chair of the Eastern Panhandle District.
In the early 1930s in the United States, they started forming conservation districts. And so here in West Virginia, it started there in the late 30s, and the entire state was divided into 14 conservation districts under the leadership of the West Virginia Department of Agriculture and the West Virginia Conservation Agency. The Eastern Panhandle District here is Morgan, Berkeley, and Jefferson County. The conservation districts have moved out, and they're the local management, they have local representatives. We currently have 2 supervisors from each county, a third from Berkeley County, as the population permits 3 representatives instead of 2 as we have in the other counties. The district is kind of organizes the local operation, and then the district looks to have cooperating agencies. In the West Virginia Conservation Agency is the key agency. They provide staff to the district to operate our conservation district offices to go out on various programs. Several other big partners. Our number 1 partner is the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Natural Resources Conservation Service. Mm-hmm. They staff the technical staff in the district offices, in their offices. And that's the agency I spent 35 years with. It was called Soil Conservation Service. And then, of course, there's the Farm Service Agency, there's the Cooperative Extension Service, there's the forestry people, are all partners with a local conservation district.
Right now, I went to their website, and when it was started, it laid out this purpose: to provide for and promote the protection and conservation of West Virginia's soil, land, water, and related resources for the health, safety, and general welfare of the state's citizens. And given that, what is the work, and you're the vice chair of this district, what is the work, what have you done? What is the conservation district?
The first start was with the individual farmers. We call them cooperators. A landowner or a landowner, if they want assistance from a district, they sign a cooperative agreement. And we utilize the state and federal staff to write a conservation plan. We try to get every landowner to have a conservation plan. That depends on how they use the land and what soil and water conservation practices that are needed to properly use that land.
All right, now hang on one second, because we're coming up to a break, but I want to get back to this about how a farmer might adversely affect water resources for a second. Our guest is Jim Michael, and we'll be back right after this break. Welcome back to This Week in Morgan County. I'm your host, Russell Mokhiber, and our guest this week is Jim Michael. Jim, before the break, we were talking about the West Virginia Conservation Agency and what a farmer might do to pollute the land or the water, and what the conservation agency might do to prevent that. Give us an
The
example.
first example would be cattle getting in the stream, a farmer having cattle and then letting them run right in the stream. They disturb the bank and probably drop manure. So we've encouraged and got farmers to protect their streams by fencing the streams so that cattle cannot get in Sleepy Creek, for instance.
Okay.
And then
What about pollution to the land and runoff from the land?
Practices on the land, contour strip cropping, alternate strips with the crop you're growing and sod, diversion terraces. This is an earthen terrace. It's sort of like a spouting on a roof on a building, but we put them out in the fields. I have several miles of them on my farm. They break the slope and catch the water runoff.
What about pesticides and fertilizers? Is there anything the conservation district could do?
We have insist the farmers have nutrient management plans. So we have a specialist come from the West Virginia Department of Agriculture. A farmer develops a nutrient management plan. They soil test the land, and it lays out the proper use of fertilizer and chemicals for weed control or pest control. So that nutrient management plan assures that we're not violating the rules, and
now,
it's run and checked by the state.
There's a lot. Morgan County's had a history of flooding. There's a lot of water in the county. This is a real success story for the conservation agency. Tell us about it.
Warm Springs Run, Berkeley Springs, in the early 50s, the USDA Soil Conservation Service identified it as a pilot small watershed program, one of the first in the United States, a small watershed program. So the way the Soil Conservation Service went at the situation here in Berkeley was to stop the water flooding downtown Berkeley Springs. The method they used is to go upstream and put in small dams that stops the runoff and holds the water and lets it out slowly. There's 8 of those dams, and most of you around the area have noticed them. There's 8 of them immediately around Berkeley Springs on small drainage way or tributaries. Each dam has the ability to catch 100-year rain without letting it run off. And then it goes out gently through like a 12-inch pipe. But there's a big storage area behind each dam to catch floodwaters. And like I said, it was one of the first in the United States, one of the first small watershed projects, and it's working.
Where are some of those dams, if people want to see them? Somewhere close to Berkeley Springs.
Well, right off of Route 9. One's on the road going up to the radio station. One's on that New Hope Road crossing over to Johnson Mill Road. Out on Winchester Grade Road, there's 3 there. In the first 2 miles. The one that's real close to the highway is where a Wall Road intersects Winchester Grade Road. You can see one of the beautiful structures there. It has nice grass structure, and the water storage is upstream, of course.
Okay, and so people can see the work of the conservation agency
yes,
there.
Yes, they can.
Your stepdad helped build Cacapon State Park.
He happened to be in the Civilian Conservation Corps.
What is that? What was the CCC?
The CCCs was a federal program to train people and to get employment. It happened during the Great Depression, and one of the CCC camps was what is now Cacapon State Park, and that was, I believe, in the late 30s. And and the federal government
said at that time, we're in a depression, people are out of work, we're going to write federal government checks to put people back to work. That's what the CCC was, right?
And they built things. You know, they put them on the ground. They didn't. You know, they had jobs that. So at Cacapon, they put the initial roads in the park. I believe the dam for the lake, and they built the old inn, which is the first hotel out there, which still has 11 rooms in it.
And that has just been renovated.
Yes,
it's absolutely gorgeous.
Just been renovated, yes.
And people can have family reunions there and rent the place out for a relatively inexpensive amount. There's dining halls and kitchens and all that.
Right. And so when when that program after the economy got moving forward, they closed out the CCs. It was throughout the United States, all over the CCCs. But so when they finished up, my stepfather, Paul Mars, stayed there to go ahead and complete some of the work on the park for a few years there until he found other employment.
How did you become interested well, obviously you have the connection through your stepdad, but you're the president of the Cacapon State Park Foundation and also the West Virginia State Parks Foundation. What was your attraction? Why did you want to work on preserving state parks?
Well, as you said, my parents were there. My mother was the first cook in the old inn. So I was out there with them, although they didn't live on the park. And then they were over operating the dairy farm after that. But Capon State Park was always something I was interested in. And I mentioned earlier in our discussion how I was away from Morgan County for 25 years. And when I came back here in 1991, they had, I believe in 1989, they formed a foundation. And that's a citizens group to get activities done at the park. So about 92 or so, they asked me to become a member. And that's when I joined the Capon Park Foundation. And we have about a 12-member committee of citizens. And
tell us a little bit about the park. I mean, it's a huge park, right? How many acres is it?
Roughly 20, I believe around 20,000, give or take some there. I'm a little vague on that.
I've heard someone say it's the crown jewel of the West Virginia State Parks.
Well, it certainly is to us. Another way happened when Governor Manchin was in. He wanted to upgrade the key state parks in the state, so they had a consulting firm evaluate them, and Capon was like number 3 in the state. There was Pipestem and Stonewall Jackson and Canaan Valley and Cacapon. And they are called a resort park because they have hotels. With the old inn there, initially that's all they had, but I think it was the late 50s, the present lodge was built, and it has, I believe, around 40 rooms or so in it. And there's also 31 cabins that are very nice out there for rental.
And a world-class golf course.
And a world-class golf course, yes. And of course the lake. And why do we have foundations? Well, there's so many things state government or federal government just can't get to. They can't get done. So foundations like Cacapon have looked at projects that they can get done that's needed that maybe the state just didn't have the time to start on.
Well, what's an example of what you do at the foundation?
At the foundation, well, we looked around and seen in the early days they needed picnic shelters. So I remember about 1993, we built the first big picnic shelter. It's called the CCC shelter there near the lake. Mm-hmm. And that was one of the first big projects for the Park Foundation. And we got lots of donated labor from in the county, carpenters, materials, and some things we had to buy. We ended up building 3 picnic shelters in the park. Then we put in the gazebo. It's the area where they have music and have a stage and all that was put in.
There is controversy at the park. There's been a plan to expand the lodge.
Yes.
And we've been hearing about that for years now. Why hasn't it happened? Well, what is the plan first? What is the plan?
The plan was to expand that lodge to add 71 additional rooms.
So it's at 40-something now?
Yeah, and add 71 more rooms, put an indoor swimming pool in, of course rebuild and enlarge all the dining areas and kitchen areas, some more improvements on the golf course.
When was that plan put forth?
I'm going to say about 4 years ago.
Okay, and what was the price tag on it?
$23 million.
And it passed the legislature. It was signed by the governor. Why hasn't it happened?
Okay, that size project has to be, the state has to decide to sell bonds and investment and find a buyer for the bonds and then borrow the money. And for some reason, when they've got to that point, it stops. their debate was that the economy was turning worse, and that West Virginia as a state's economic strengths weren't there. But it's very hard to understand how it's been properly processed through the legislature twice, and still it stops when you get to the point of of getting the real money.
Have you spoken with our local state representatives about it?
All the time.
And what do they say? What's their answer to why there's a delay?
Well, I'm not sure. They say it all ends up with the governor, that the governor has to force the sale of the bonds or sign on to it and go.
Have you spoken to our governor about it?
Oh, yes, we have. Ladies and gentlemen, what's confusing was he come here several years ago, had me have a meeting in our courthouse, and he presented me with a plaque that the lodge would be built.
He gave you a plaque and a promise?
Yes.
And when was that?
Several years ago. I don't know, it was precisely 2 years ago or 3. I've got it at home.
Was there a deadline on the promise?
I don't know.
Okay. Now, since that, though, you must have said to yourself, I've been given a promise that this money would be forthcoming. And what has he said in response to that?
Well, I have to work with his staff, and they keep talking about the financial difficulties of West Virginia's credit rating, and that they haven't been able to see clearly to purchase bonds. And all of our legislators have worked on it from the eastern part of the state. All of them. Senator Herb Snyder out of Jefferson County constantly worked on it. Of course, Charles Trump is currently working on it. But all of our representatives from the state of West Virginia, Senate, House of Representatives, have been supportive of this. But getting it through Charleston takes statewide support.
And of course, one of the things people in Morgan County can do is call their representatives and say, what's the deal? Because, I mean, how many people, do you have any sense of what part Cacapon State Park plays in the Morgan County economy? It's got to be a big driver, right?
Yeah, it employs more, a good many people. And of course it has the most, I believe the most income from the hotel motel tax. I believe it would generate more than any other hotel in the county.
You also sit on the West Virginia State Parks Foundation.
Yes.
Give us a sense of, one of the things that happened here in Morgan County was that when Cacapon closed, that was a blow to the community.
Yes.
Because a lot of people came from out of town here. People who went to Cacapon came into town and spent money. So it was a blow to the community and to the economy. And Cacapon is adjacent to Cacapon State Park. The property is adjacent, and it would seem a natural thing to include it as part of Cacapon State Park. What are your thoughts on that? Would that be a good idea if the state had the money to expand Cacapon State Park in that way?
It's something hard for me to answer. It appears to me for these parks, to generate an income, you have to have dining room. You have to be selling rooms, hotel rooms, and cabins, and we've never charged an entry fee. Some states,
Some
they charge
parks,
you.
well, none of the state parks do in West Virginia?
I don't believe so.
Okay, so that's actually really good that because I live close by and I live just going over.
That's been brought up by the state House of Representatives and Senate.
To charge an entry.
Yeah, they always talk about wanting to put a charge on the use of the park.
All right, to be continued. We're at the end of our second segment. Thank you very much for coming in. If people want more information, Cacapon State Park Foundation and West Virginia Conservation Agency. Thank you for joining us. Until next week, this is This Week in Morgan County.